Imagine you are the CEO of the most powerful corporation on earth. You're 32 years old, you're lying on your deathbed, and your board of directors leans in.
Right. They want to know who gets the controlling shares.
Exactly. They ask who inherits everything, and you use your final breath to whisper, whoever wins the knife fight, and then you die.
Which is, it's basically a succession plan that guarantees the immediate destruction of everything you just spent your entire lifetime building.
Yeah, and that is essentially the final act of Alexander the Great. Welcome to this deep dive, where our mission today is to unpack a really massive stack of sources on this guy.
And we really have to look past that basic, guy who conquered the world narrative.
Right, because we're looking at a 5.2 million square kilometer empire here, stretching all the way from Greece through Egypt and Persia, right to modern-day India.
Yeah, and achieved without ever losing a single battle, which is just wild to think about.
It really is. So we want to explore how he actually did this by age 30 and how he managed, or I guess totally mismanaged, this incredibly diverse multicultural empire.
Because it's not just a story about military might. It's an absolute masterclass in PR, in adaptation, and ultimately, the fatal flaw of unchecked ambition.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the psychology driving that ambition really has to be our starting point, right?
Oh, totally. His trajectory makes a lot more sense when you look at the conditioning he received from birth.
Right, born in 356 BC.
Exactly. And his mother, Queen Olympias, she didn't just raise him as the heir to King Philip II of Macedon. She actively indoctrinated him.
Indoctrinated him how? Like to be a strong ruler?
No, like with the belief that he was literal divinity. The sources are just filled with this foundational PR campaign.
Oh, wow. So it started that early.
Yeah. According to the ancient accounts, Olympias claimed that right before she consummated her marriage, she dreamed a thunderbolt struck her womb.
A thunderbolt?
A thunderbolt that started this massive fire that swept across the entire land.
That is some intense mythological branding right there. And didn't something happen with a temple when he was born, too?
Yeah. On the exact day he was born, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which was, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, it mysteriously burned to the ground.
And of course, they spun that into part of the legend.
Right. Later commentators were like, oh, the goddess Artemis was just too preoccupied attending Alexander's birth to save her own temple.
That is so convenient. But, okay, looking at this from a psychological perspective, how does a child internalize that?
It's a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Right. Without becoming completely detached from reality. Did he actually believe his own hype? Or was this just a convenient political tool to intimidate rivals?
That's the big question.
Because today we'd look at him like the ultimate Nepo baby, right? Did he actually have the skills to back up all this divine branding?
Well, the historical consensus points to this really highly effective, if somewhat dangerous, synthesis of both.
Okay, so he believed it, but he could also back it up.
Exactly. The mythology gave him this absolute unshakable self-confidence. But that confidence was anchored by a really hyper-rational education.
Ah, right. King Philip hired Aristotle.
Yeah, he hired Aristotle to tutor Alexander when he was just 13 years old. And Aristotle didn't just teach him to, memorize the Iliad.
Though he did carry an annotated copy of the Iliad everywhere, right?
He did. He totally viewed himself as the new Achilles. But beyond the poetry, Aristotle taught him empiricism.
So observation, science.
Right. He taught him how to observe the physical world, how to apply cold, hard logic to biology and geography.
Which strips away a lot of the mysticism, actually. It leaves you with a deeply analytical mind.
And you see the physical evidence of that analytical approach super early on, like with the famous story of his horse, Bucephalus.
Oh, I love this story. So a trader brings this massive, supposedly untamable horse to King Philip.
Right, and the animal is just bucking, totally terrified, completely rejecting every seasoned veteran rider who tries to mount it.
And Philip is just ready to give up and send the horse away.
But Alexander, who is, he's only 10 years old at this point.
10? That's wild.
Yeah, 10. He notices something that all these veteran soldiers completely missed because he's actually observing the environment.
He sees the horse is terrified of its own shadow, right?
Exactly. The shadow is just darting back and forth on the ground and the horse is panicking.
So he identifies the actual mechanism of the problem rather than just, fighting the symptom.
Precisely. So he asks for a chance, turns the horse to face the sun so the shadow falls behind it, and just calmly mounts the animal.
Just like that.
Just like that. And Philip is supposedly brought to tears, telling him, Macedon is simply too small for your ambitions.
Wow. So he applied like Aristotelian observation to a biological problem.
Yeah, and that specific ability, reading the geometry and the psychology of a situation, is exactly how he dismantled the greatest armies in the world just a decade later.
Right, because his father, Philip, is assassinated, and Alexander takes the throne at age 20. And he inherits this incredible tool, the Macedonian phalanx.
Oh, the phalanx was devastating.
Yeah, a dense formation of infantry holding these massive 20-foot-long spears called sarissas.
But, a solid block of men holding 20-foot spears is also incredibly heavy.
Very slow to maneuver.
Very slow, and highly vulnerable if you get attacked from the side or the rear.
So how does he use such a rigid tool to defeat the Persian Empire? Because they had vast superior numbers, right? And highly mobile units.
What's fascinating here is how he turned a rigid tool into a dynamic one just by understanding the physics of his enemy's weapons.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC is the perfect case study. The Persian king, Darius III, deploys scythed chariots.
Scythed chariots, so heavy carts with massive spinning blades attached to the wheel.
Exactly, designed to smash into an infantry line and literally mow down the soldiers.
Well, yeah, if you try to hold a static line against that much kinetic energy, your line is going to break. It's just basic physics.
Right. Most ancient commanders would either panic or try to heavily reinforce the wall of men.
But Alexander doesn't do that.
No, because he understands that a chariot relies entirely on momentum.
Oh.
And it has a terrible turning radius.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So rather than bracing for impact, he orders his phalanx to simply shift their formations at an angle right when the chariots charge.
Creating these open diagonal lanes in the ranks.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because it's like he's designing a pressure valve.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Instead of building a massive dam to stop a flash flood, which, might break anyway, you just build spillways.
Right.
You let the water rush exactly where you want it to go, completely stripping it of its destructive force. And this is like a nimble, disruptive startup facing off against a massive legacy corporation. He never relies on just one playbook.
That's spot on. The chariots just drive straight through the gaps, entirely harmlessly.
Because they can't hit what isn't there.
Right. And because they're moving way too fast to turn around inside those narrow lanes, they are easily neutralized by the light infantry waiting at the rear.
He essentially used the Persian army's own kinetic energy against them.
He did. And he applies that exact same environmental adaptation years later in India at the Battle of the Hydaspes.
Okay, but this time he's not facing chariots. King Porus brings war elephants.
Yeah. And you can't use a pressure valve strategy on an intelligent biological tank that will just, turn around and stomp on your soldiers.
Right. The spillway doesn't work if the water can think.
Exactly. And the Macedonian troops are terrified. I mean, horses will naturally bolt from the smell and the sound of an elephant.
So his elite cavalry is pretty much useless in a direct charge.
Right. So he fundamentally changes his tactical approach on the fly. He orders his infantry to envelop the elephant.
You envelop them with the 20-foot spears.
Yeah. Instead of trying to pierce the thick hide of the animals, they use that huge reach to strike upward at the handlers riding on top.
Oh, wow. So they neutralize the biological weapon by, removing its guidance system.
Exactly. It's just an incredible display of tactical fluidity.
But as he pushes further east, conquering all these massive territories, he runs into a barrier that you really cannot defeat with geometry or 20-foot spears.
The culture war.
Exactly. He actually has to govern. And the sources show a really sharp pivot here, where Alexander realizes that ruling 5.2 million square kilometers of diverse cultures requires a completely different mechanism than conquering them.
Yeah, and this is where the foundation of his empire actually begins to fracture.
Right, because the transition from a battlefield general to a legitimate emperor of a multicultural territory requires, intense public relations.
He needs the local populations to view him not as some Macedonian occupier, but as their rightful traditional ruler.
And in Egypt, the mechanism for this is religious integration.
Right. He travels deep into the Libyan desert to the Siwa oasis to consult the oracle of Amun,
where the priests miraculously pronounce him the literal son of the deity Amun.
Funny how that works out. So he merges his existing Greek brand, being the son of Zeus, with the Egyptian pantheon. He becomes Zeus Amun.
Right. He even mints those coins showing himself wearing the ram's horns of Amun.
Exactly. And to the Egyptians, this legitimizes him as pharaoh. It's a brilliant, bloodless political maneuver.
I want to pause here, though, and probe a massive paradox in the source material.
Okay, what is it?
The Greek and Macedonian soldiers seem perfectly fine with Alexander wandering into the Egyptian desert and declaring himself a living god.
Right.
But shortly after, when he tries to adopt Persian customs to legitimize his rule in the East, those exact same soldiers completely lose their minds. I mean, they mutiny. What is the fundamental difference there?
Well, the difference lies in the mechanics of governance versus the physical reality of the soldiers' daily lives.
How so?
Claiming divine parentage in Egypt was, to a Greek soldier, almost just a political abstraction. It didn't change how Alexander treated them in the mess tent.
Okay, that makes sense.
But conquering the Persian Achaemenid Empire meant inheriting a deeply entrenched, highly complex administrative bureaucracy.
Right, it was massive.
Yeah, they had regional governors called satraps, intricate taxation systems, sprawling supply lines. Alexander couldn't just, fire all the Persian elites and replace them with Greek generals who had no idea how to manage that kind of infrastructure.
He absolutely needs the Persian nobility just to keep the lights on.
Exactly. So to keep their loyalty, he has to participate in their court culture. He adopts Persian royal dress. But the real breaking point is a specific Persian court custom called proskynesis.
Which involves bowing, right? Or like entirely prostrating yourself face down on the ground before a social superior.
Yeah. To the Persians, this is just standard, everyday administrative respect. It's how you acknowledge the hierarchy that keeps the empire functioning.
But to a battle-hardened Macedonian veteran, physical prostration is a mechanism of slavery.
Absolutely.
Because Greek culture, especially among its citizen soldiers, was fiercely egalitarian.
Right. They viewed themselves as free men.
Free men fighting alongside a king who was supposed to be the first among equals. So bowing on the floor, that was an act strictly reserved for worshiping the gods.
Exactly. So when Alexander demands his Greek generals perform proskynesis to appease the Persian court, he's not just asking for a cultural compromise.
No, he's violating their core identity as free men. I mean, they must have seen this as creeping megalomania.
Oh, they definitely did. And you've identified the exact friction point that destroys his inner circle. He totally failed to find a mechanism to balance the administrative needs of the conquered with the cultural pride of the conquerors.
The Greeks flat out refused to perform the ritual.
They do. And the tension brews into this really deep, toxic paranoia. Alexander starts uncovering assassination plots, whether they were real or imagined, from his own royal pages.
It gets so dark.
It really does. He executes one of his most loyal commanders, Philotas, for allegedly failing to report a plot. And then he immediately orders the assassination of Philotas' father.
The top general, Parmenion.
Yeah, simply to prevent any potential vengeance.
And the psychological decay really peaks at that drunken banquet in modern-day Uzbekistan with a senior officer named Cletus the Black.
Right. And Cletus wasn't just any officer. This is a guy who had personally severed the arm of a Persian cavalryman who was seconds away from killing Alexander at the Battle of the Granicus.
He literally saved his life.
Yes. And during this banquet, they're drinking heavily, and a deeply intoxicated argument breaks out. Cletus voices the exact cultural friction we just discussed.
Right. He accuses Alexander of abandoning his Macedonian roots.
He accuses him of adopting a corrupt autocracy and demanding the worship of free men. It's a total boiling point.
And Alexander's response is to grab a spear and drive it through the man who saved his life. He just murders Cletus in front of the entire command staff.
Which is just... he was supposedly consumed by grief immediately afterward, locking himself in his tent for days. But the damage was done. The trust was permanently broken.
You can't undo that.
No. And later, Alexander even attempts to force cultural fusion through biology. At Susa, he organizes this massive mass wedding.
Right, ordering his senior Macedonian officers to marry Persian noblewomen.
Explicitly trying to breed a new hybrid ruling class that would owe its existence entirely to him.
It's like he's trying to forcibly weld two tectonic plates together. And the heat from that friction is just burning out his entire command structure.
It really is.
And what's fascinating is that this internal administrative burnout perfectly mirrors the physical burnout of his army.
Absolutely.
By 326 BC, they are deep in the Indian subcontinent. They have been marching and bleeding for over a decade. And Alexander wants to cross the Beas River and continue east to the Ganges.
But the soldiers have just reached the absolute limit of human endurance. The monsoon rains have been pouring for 2 straight months.
Whoa, it's miserable.
Their armor is rusting. Their clothes are literally rotting off their bodies. And more importantly, they are hearing localized intelligence about what actually waits for them across that river.
The Nanda Empire.
Yeah. The rumors suggest an army of 200,000 infantry, tens of thousands of cavalry, and anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 war elephants.
3,000 to 6,000.
Right. After the nightmare of fighting just a couple hundred elephants at the Hydaspes, the psychological toll of facing thousands is just way too much.
Yeah, the army officially mutinies. They sit down in the mud and refuse to take another step east.
And Alexander tries to weed them out. He sulks in his tent for a few days, but the leverage is totally gone.
The mechanism of his conquest, the absolute loyalty of his troops, has completely stalled.
So he is forced to order the long, brutal march back toward Babylon.
And he never sees Greece again.
No, he doesn't. He dies in Babylon at the age of 32.
June 323 BC. The sources detail a sudden fever following a night of heavy drinking.
Right. And over the course of 2 weeks, he loses his mobility, he loses his ability to speak, and finally he just slips away.
Now, the historical debate over the cause of death is intense. You read ancient historians like Justin or Diodorus, and there is a very heavy implication of poison.
Oh, for sure.
But looking at modern toxicological and medical analysis, what is the most probable mechanism of his death?
Well, the poison theories are definitely compelling because they fit that whole narrative of a paranoid, mutinous command staff, right?
Right.
One modern theory points to white hellebore, which was a toxic plant known in antiquity. The symptoms of hellebore poisoning, this slow, agonizing physical decline, they actually closely match the timeline detailed in the Alexander romance.
Interesting. Are there other poison theories?
Yeah, another theory suggests his staff brought water from the river Styx in Greece. Modern geologists think that water may have contained a deadly limestone-dwelling bacteria called caliciamycin.
Wow. But you don't necessarily need exotic poisons or mythic river water to explain the death of a man whose body was pushed to those extreme limits, right?
Exactly the opposite, actually. A biological collapse is arguably the most sound conclusion.
Just natural causes.
Yeah. I mean, he had sustained catastrophic injuries over the decade, including an arrow that completely punctured his lung in India.
Plus, he was a chronic, severe alcoholic.
He was, and he was likely suffering from malaria or typhoid fever, which were highly endemic to Babylon at the time.
And on top of all that physical trauma, there's the psychological toll.
Right. His immune system was likely just devastated by the grief of losing his closest companion, Hephaestion, to illness just a few months prior.
Which brings us back to that incredible deathbed scene. Alexander is paralyzed, he's stripped of his ability to speak. So what does this all mean? When asked who inherits the greatest empire in human history, he whispers, "To the strongest."
Yeah, that phrase, toi kratostoi, it is the ultimate failure of his administrative vision.
It really is.
He guarantees that his generals, the Diadochi, will immediately turn their sarissas on each other. The empire is carved up into rival kingdoms almost overnight.
So the sources reveal a leader who possessed an unparalleled genius for dismantling the old world, but just a total inability to institutionalize a new one.
Precisely. His power relied entirely on his physical presence and his personal momentum. And the second the momentum stopped, the empire dissolved.
It's an amazing lesson in leadership. But before we conclude this deep dive, there is one lingering detail in the texts of Diodorus that really forces you to reevaluate just how far that momentum would have gone if his body hadn't failed him.
You're referring to the last plans.
Yes, the last plans that were read to the Macedonian troops in Babylon by his general, Perdiccas.
Right.
Alexander left behind written blueprints for what he intended to do next. And he wasn't planning to consolidate his borders or stabilize his economy.
No, definitely not.
He wanted to build a fleet of 1,000 warships to invade Carthage and conquer the entire Western Mediterranean.
Just massive scale.
He ordered the construction of a tomb for his father, Philip, that was designed to rival the exact dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Which is just staggering to even picture. And most alarmingly, he detailed a systematic plan to transplant entire populations.
Wait, like forced migrations?
Yeah. He wanted to forcibly march massive demographic groups from Europe into Asia and from Asia into Europe.
To what end?
To basically mandate cultural unity through continental intermarriage.
Unbelievable. His generals, who were already exhausted and terrified by the scale of these ambitions, secretly voted to just shelve all those plans.
They were like, absolutely not.
Right. But consider the implications here. Think about how completely unrecognizable the modern map, modern genetics, and modern culture would be today if his army hadn't sat down in the mud at that river in India.
It's wild to think about.
What if the mechanisms of his ambition hadn't finally broken down and those extravagant, terrifying final plans had actually been unleashed on the world? Definitely something to think about. We'll see you on the next deep dive.